Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending where you are on the globe. I'm Dave Robertson, and I'd like to welcome you to Treasury Strategies and Bottom Line Technologies webinar, How Banks and Corporates Can Prevent Payments Fraud Together. Within a few days, you'll receive an email link to the presentation and the recording on Treasury Strategies' YouTube channel. And during the event, if you have any questions, we ask that you communicate by clicking the question mark icon, and time permitting, at the end of the presentation, the panelists will address the questions. We have almost 1,000 people registered for this webinar, and I think that underscores how important this topic is, both to corporations and to the banking providers that serve them. So we're happy to have a great group today. We're going to begin with panelist introductions. I'm going to give some quick background on the industry and also share some survey results that we conducted among our corporate and bank clients. And then we're going to get different perspectives on payment fraud. We'll begin with the banker's view, then shift to the view from the corporate, and finally the technologist's view, closing with a view as to how corporates, banks, and technology firms can collaborate to prevent payment fraud. My name is Dave Robertson, and I'm a partner with Treasury Strategies. I'm joined today with Margaret McLeod, BBVA Compass Bank. She is the Executive Director and e-banking manager. We have Shelley Travis from BB&T Bank, Senior Vice President, Treasury Services, Product and Risk Manager. Mike Vignew from Bottom Line Technologies, Corporate Vice President, and Craig Montaigne, Tishman Speyer, Senior Treasury Director. Security fraud is top of mind. Spending on security has doubled in the last 4 years. And what's more worrisome is many companies that were breached were found to be compliant on their various security measures. It's almost the same consideration as AIG, which was AAA rated before it went bankrupt. In the same status, many companies have assessments that say they're compliant, but in fact, they are exposed to security risks. There's a major shortage of security talent, and that's actually expected to get worse in the near term. According to Mandiant, the average hacker dwell time is 205 days, and dwell time is the number of days that a threat actor remains undetected within an environment without remediation. So literally, the hackers aren't just getting in, they're setting up shop, and they're living in your basement. On this slide, we show the recent history of detected incidents, and two things jump out. From 2009 to 2015, the number of detected incidents has skyrocketed to well over 100 million. And then if you look at some of the prominent names, Google, Target, Sony, the Sony breach of the emails was in the popular news for quite a bit, and even companies such as Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and even agencies of the federal government such as the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. So these are not poorly run organizations that are being breached. These are well-run companies with smart people trying to address security risk. So at this point, we're going to share some survey results. And the first is around how big a concern is security, payment fraud, and cyber risk. And what we found is that for the banks, shown in blue, cyber risk is a top priority or a significant priority. This is higher than the corporates, but it would be incorrect to say the corporates are not concerned. Well over half of the corporate respondents noted that cyber fraud is a top priority or a significant priority, and very few deemed it not important at all. In terms of requiring training, you can see that the majority of banks are requiring training for all employees, and a significant portion are also targeting that training to employee in key roles. Again, the corporations are not quite as extensive in their training, but even those that are not doing training, many of them are exploring what kind of training they should be doing. And I think one of the themes we're going to hear from our panelists is that there is no single approach to deal with cyber fraud. It takes multiple approaches, and training is part of that approach. We also asked the corporations to what degree they were using dual approval on both payment requests and initiation. So can I initiate a payment on my own, or does that take a secondary independent individual to also authorize that payment request? A majority of corporations responded that they indeed do have dual controls, but you can see that many do not. They may have dual approval on the request or the initiation. 12% don't have dual controls on either, and 1/5 of the corporations weren't quite sure what their approach was. We then asked the bank about what kind of fraud analytics they were applying. The ideal approach would be on the far left, where it is a real-time system and it's unified across payment applications. So not only is it looking at individual payment exposures, but it's looking at the aggregate activity to detect patterns. We also see then that in many cases, banks are still very siloed in their fraud analytics. It may be in batch mode, it may be done at an individual application level. What about payment fraud? How often is it happening, and are organizations identifying and stopping security attacks? Many corporates don't know about threats until they've actually experienced a loss, and the average time to actually uncover and detect a fraud incident was just over 1 month. And when you think about what can occur in 1 month in terms of damage, that's a pretty worrisome statistic. On the left, we see that 21% of corporations reported being the victim of a cybersecurity attack in the last year, and another 18% had been the victim over 1 year ago. Roughly half of the companies that we surveyed had not yet been a victim of a cybersecurity attack. And then 35% had thwarted an attack in the last year, and 12% had thwarted an attack in more than a year. So these attacks are occurring. They're sometimes being thwarted, but companies are being victimized. 1 in 5 companies reported that they had been the victim of a cybersecurity attack in the last year alone. So how does this affect how corporates see their banking relationship? And this is a very interesting slide for me personally. I think it's actually quite enlightened that you see that almost half of the corporations that we surveyed indicated that they do take into consideration a bank's fraud performance in their banking relationship decisions. So increasingly, corporations want to know about a bank's abilities to prevent fraud and how they can partner with the corporation to reduce the risk of fraud. We also see a very sophisticated view on the right-hand side, who's responsible when there is a loss? And it's kind of a simplistic question, and in fact, most respondents noted that it does depend. Was the bank liable? Was the company negligible? And in most cases, it is not just up to one entity to prevent the fraud, but it takes both entities acting at their best to minimize the risk of fraud. So we're going to begin with a polling question, and we'd like you to tell us which you're more optimistic about, the U.S. presidential election or your ability to prevent fraud. And hopefully you're not depressed about both of those, but we want to know which you're more optimistic about. Okay, in just a minute, we'll show the results. Okay. Okay, so what we found was that a majority of people are more optimistic about their ability to prevent fraud. So I don't know if that speaks to the situation in the U.S. presidential election, but I'd like to optimistically think that people are taking action and optimistic about their ability to prevent fraud. Okay, at this stage, we're going to open it up to our panelists, and I'm delighted to have a banker's perspective from Shelley Travis at BB&T.
Thanks, Dave. So at BB&T, we are currently very fortunate to not be experiencing any issues with account takeover fraud, which was a hot topic several years ago. In fact, we have actually not had any losses related to that type of fraud in over 3 years. That track record is largely because of our heightened focus on protecting our clients and the tools that we've put in place to help with this effort. Today, however, our primary concern is really around business email compromise fraud. And with business email compromise, that can take a number of different forms. Some examples would include an associate receiving an email request from upper management or someone in the C-suite about an urgent need to send funds. Often that associate is told that this is part of a confidential deal and they have to keep this request to themselves. Other situations could be an email or a call from a vendor or someone impersonating a vendor, notifying the company of a payment account number change that needs to take effect immediately. In most of these cases, these types of transactions look very similar to normal activity by the company, and that can make it very difficult, if not impossible, for the bank to detect in our back-end systems that something unusual is going on. In fact, at BB&T, we've had scenarios where we have been able to identify that something is suspicious and we've reached out to a client for verification. In those calls, we explain business email compromise to the user and ask them to make sure that this really is a valid request and that they want that transaction released. Unfortunately, we have had some situations where a client has insisted on the release of a payment only to find out a few days later that they've been the victim of a scam. At BB&T, as Dave mentioned, we use many layers of defense to help protect our clients. There is no silver bullet. It takes multiple efforts to try and safeguard our clients' assets. Some of the ones that I'll just highlight, and this is not an all-inclusive list, would be that we mandate the use of hard token authentication, both at login and at transaction initiations for our clients. We also require the use of anti-malware software by all of our users and able to log into our application, and BB&T uses Trusteer for that service today. Behind the scenes, we do transaction risk scoring. This is what helps us identify if a transaction looks abnormal. And when we see something that does appear to be suspicious, we make outbound confirmation calls to our clients before we release those payments. One of the other key areas for us is around client education, and we take this effort in a number of different forms. It could be that we do educational messages or even warning messages if we're seeing something happen in the market within our online platform or on our bbnt.com site. We do publish white papers. In fact, BB&T has a white paper coming out late next week, early the following week, focused on fighting payment fraud that will be available on bbnt.com. We send annual reminders around security protocols to our users. We do regional fraud seminars. We do an outreach by our relationship managers, all in an effort to help educate our clients on how they can help themselves. As we go forward, we are constantly looking for ways to evolve our security methods. We are very focused on balancing risk mitigation with user experience. And so we are looking at options for hard token alternatives to improve the usability for our clients. We are looking for ways to deepen the integration among the extensive security tools that we already have in place so that we can have an even stronger layer of protection available. And then lastly, but certainly not least, continuing that client education effort to ensure our clients are aware and knowledgeable of how they can stop fraud within their own environment. Fraud control is truly a joint effort between the bank and our clients.
Thanks very much, Shelley. Now from BBVA, we have Margaret McLeod.
Yes. So we are seeing many of the same scenarios as Shelley described so well related to social engineering scams. And unfortunately, we have seen some of our customers fall victim and take losses. We at BBVA have always believed it's our responsibility to protect our customers and their transactions while using our services. but these social engineering scams are really tests of the corporate's internal controls before they initiate the payments. So now we are trying to help them identify the fraud earlier in the process. Similarly, we still see employees in both large and small companies receiving fraudulent emails indicating, oh, there's an issue with your e-banking access. And the email instructs the user to click a link and update their credentials, which in essence gives away their valid credentials. After years of warning our customers about this type of fraud, many times our customers are alert and do not take action. In fact, some will even send us the email to help us track the fraudster, which is great. Now, as for describing our current protection environment, well, BBVA Compass is very risk-averse. In 2010 to 2011, we saw what we deemed enough of the account takeovers and the key logging. So in 2012, we mandated the use of Trustier's Rapport security application on our commercial platform. The user systematically cannot log in. They cannot complete the login process without Rapport on their PC. Since then, there have been no bank losses related to our e-banking platform in close to 4 years. Now, that may sound like a great commercial for Trustier, and Shelley mentioned it as well, but we do not rely on that alone. In fact, the more layering, the better. We have 24 types of controls on our commercial platform. Each control is for a specific type of fraud, which therefore necessitates the need for a variety and multiple layers of controls. We must continue to evaluate, add to, and change our controls as the fraudsters continue to evolve and improve their skills and their tools. In 2014, we switched from an adaptive form of authentication with challenge questions to begin requiring a token or one-time passcode challenge at every login. I'll admit our customers were not happy with this new challenge on top of all the existing MFA challenges for user administration and for payments. So I heard a lot of feedback about that change. The key is always finding that right balance. We are trying to protect our customers, but some controls do impact them. As bankers, we must help our customers understand why we have the controls and why they must go through that extra step, which is a big part of our continued efforts around client education. Our message is really to inform customers of what can happen, how we can help them, and how they can help themselves. For example, we distribute an annual security checklist of controls available within our online platform, as well as controls the customers can implement internally. And we periodically run bulletin messages suggesting a proactive action such as reviewing and updating transaction limits, deleting user IDs no longer needed, and encouraging the use of dual controls, which, as pointed out earlier, are still not used by a lot of companies. We also focus education on our own client-facing employees so that they can advise companies on ways to identify and avoid the social engineering scams and other security risks. We also publish periodic white papers on fraud hot topics, and overall we are trying to increase awareness of security threats and provide our customers methods to protect themselves. Now, as for going forward, we will be going back to using a risk-based authentication software within our commercial platform. First of all, this approach provides a better customer experience to not always challenge at login, but only when the risk score prompts a challenge. Additionally, we will apply this software to our user administration and payments functions. Initially, we'll just be capturing transaction patterns to build history in the system while the fraud department manually responds to the suspects. Then we will implement the interactive online response to suspects. This staged approach should minimize any negative customer impact of pending a valid transaction while the system learns the user's patterns. In general, we're moving towards more real-time tools to detect fraud earlier in the workflow. For example, we want to detect fraud at the point of online initiation or approval before the payment is even sent to our back office ACH and wire transfer applications, or worse, they leave the bank. Also this year, we will begin offering soft tokens as another MFA option for companies who prefer tokens but the employees want more convenience than keeping up with a key fob hard token. Additionally, the soft tokens will enable more of our traditional token users to take advantage of our mobile channel while away from the office. We employ all the same controls and MFA requirements in our mobile app as we have in our online channel. So using a soft token will facilitate the mobile MFA validation without having to take your key fob wherever you go. So again, a key driver for BBVA and all banks is finding ways to balance security and a positive customer experience. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. And it's interesting to note that you both cited not only continued technological advances and kind of a multi-pronged approach, but you both noticed the importance of trying to balance security with the overall customer experience. And I know that's a major focus of banks, and it's not always perfectly aligned with security approaches. So at this point, we're going to shift for a corporate perspective, and we're going to turn to Craig Montaigne with Tishman Speyer.
Thank you, Dave. All corporates agree on one thing. When it comes to fraud, we're against it. It leads to both financial loss and possibly worse, reputational loss. None of our companies want to end up on the front page of the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times describing how we had a loss due to fraud. This could lead to hurting our stock prices or increasing our borrowing costs. So what do we feel corporates can do to help reduce the loss due to fraud? The first part centers around education. Margaret already mentioned it before from the bank side, but corporate treasury has the responsibility to learn about the latest threats and schemes from their banking partners and others by participating in webinars such as this or other means to learn as much as you can. On the other side of that, corporate treasury needs to lead the internal mass education to all of your colleagues and peers around the world who handle bank accounts or sensitive information. As Margaret also said, the risk of loss is moving from the banks to the corporates. And this is a trend that I feel is going to continue and not reverse the other direction. Another area that we as corporates can do is, of course, enhancing our controls. Controls have to be periodically reviewed to ensure that segregation of duties exists, and particularly when it comes to payment fraud, that vendor creation is properly controlled and payments are properly authorized. As Dave said earlier, dual controls remain the gold standard. If controls are found to be inadequate or weak, they really need to be remediated. Far better to go to your CFO or CEO and explain why you need to spend money remediating controls than to go to them with a loss and still need to remediate the controls. So corrective action needs to be taken as soon as possible once controls deficiencies are recognized. Partner involvement on both the AR and AP side of the equation is very important. Educating and cooperating with your vendors and suppliers to identify fraudulent payment requests in order to minimize the criminals receiving your outgoing payments. Making sure that your vendors and suppliers have a means to send you authenticated wire instruction changes or address changes is key. Educating and cooperating with your customers as well is very important to make sure that your payments are going to the right place as well. Otherwise, you'll end up supplying money to a criminal who's very thankful for that money, but your customer is still without their funds. And finally, IT involvement. The Corporate Treasury Department and the IT Department have to work together to make sure that the most up-to-date firewalls, fraudulent email detection, VPN, passwords, and the like are all in place to make sure that the fraudster's opportunity to steal from us, the corporates, is minimized. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Craig. We're now going to go to another polling question, and this is around fraud attempts. Compared to last year, have fraud attempts at your organization decreased significantly, decreased slightly, stayed flat, increased slightly, or increased significantly? give you a moment here to complete the poll question, and we'll then tabulate the results. Okay, we have the results, and it's a little bit of a normal distribution. 44% of you noted that fraud attempts increased slightly, 24% increased significantly, 34% stayed flat, and no one reported that they had decreased significantly, and just a small percentage noted that they decreased slightly. So for most of us, fraud attempts are increasing slightly, or at best, they're staying flat. Great. Okay, at this point, we're going to switch over and we're going to turn to a technologist for a technology perspective, and we have Mike Vigue from Bottom Line Technologies.
Thanks, Dave. I usually like to start my presentations off with a quote, and I like the one from John Chambers from Cisco. There are two types of companies, those who have been hacked and those who don't yet know they've been hacked. But I think that everyone already knows that. I think the theme that's resonated throughout this presentation is one that we already know just by picking up a newspaper. Cyber fraud is a global problem, and it's one of the most prolific technology challenges facing the world today. But the question is what do you do about it from a technology perspective? Next slide, please. I like to use a castle analogy when I think of cybersecurity. In medieval times, in order to protect the kingdom from invaders, builders, they designed multiple defense mechanisms such that if the outermost perimeters were breached, they could regroup further in the core. You know, you had a moat, an outer wall, an inner wall, et cetera. I think today's cyber fraud defense mechanisms need to take a similar approach. You need to do everything you can to keep the intruders out, but you have to have other layers in place to protect against those that breach the internal systems, you know, and/or hijack user credentials, such as and you need to utilize tools such as user monitoring and analysis in order to prevent that. And I'll spend time on that in a few moments. User monitoring analysis actually tracks how each user is interacting within an application, and it's looking for anomalous behavior. You know, as an example, if I typically use an application for 30 to 60 minutes a day for light reporting, and today I'm logged into the application for most of the day initiating large transactions, it might not be me using my credentials, even though the systems think it is me. Now, a good case was noted earlier by Dave is Sony. Hackers have actually deployed bots to simulate user activity within that organization, whereas a single user ID was executing more than 100 tasks at a time. Now, I know people that are very good at multitasking, but I've never seen anybody be able to do that. So, you know, had somebody been tracking user activity, they would have noticed that a human couldn't possibly be performing that many tasks at one time. Next slide, please. So, you know, however, even with the best systems in place, organizations still face challenges. It's not enough to identify when fraud has occurred. It needs to be stopped, and you can't do that if you're sifting through hundreds of false positives. Now, I've talked to larger organizations that generate over 1 million security alerts a day, and if the vast majority of these alerts are false positives, it creates an administrative burden on the resources that are responsible for investigating them. And furthermore, if an organization is not looking beyond simply meeting the minimum compliance standards, your market share is at risk, which was highlighted in the survey results that Dave spoke about earlier. Fraudsters today are organized, they're intelligent, and they're technologically savvy. They launched sophisticated campaigns to collect information in order to trick even the most educated people, and I think what we heard from the banks that were presenting is that they've seen this even from some of their corporate customers. The hackers are creating fictitious LinkedIn profiles in order to get information about emails and phone numbers for senior executives, and they're using that to establish the phishing emails that were referred to by Shelley and Margaret earlier in the presentation. So relying solely on process and educating end users, it doesn't offer, that's definitely a step that everybody needs to take, but it doesn't offer all of the protections that are needed. You know, as an example, accounts payable departments, they're inundated with requests to change account numbers for electronic payments for electronic payments. And it's become common these days for fraudsters to send emails that appear legitimate asking to change vendor accounts, as we heard earlier, and many times they're successful. I've seen these emails myself, and frankly, I can understand why some people would process them. Next slide, please. So what are the keys to success? Organizations need a proactive solution and not a reactive solution that will monitor access to their mission-critical applications in real time and address the traditional blind spots that are sometimes missed. Now, the technology should be one that will capture data across applications so as to provide a holistic view of how a user is interacting with your organization and not just one application. Individual audit logs are not enough. It only tells what I was doing in one system. It doesn't give a good idea of what I'm doing within my company as a whole on any given day. And then finally, it needs to prioritize alerts based on risk scores and draw attention to where attention is needed. We heard earlier that there's a lack of talent in the field in this space, and that's only going to continue to get worse. So these applications need to provide the tools to speed investigations and allow junior resources to quickly and easily identify bad behavior and clear false positives. And most important, next slide please, stop fraud before financial loss. I think that's the goal. Systems that look at behavior after the fact are not doing enough to stop fraud. You know, whether you're used to monitoring user behavior, whatever you use to monitor user behavior needs to be tightly integrated into the system it's monitoring to stop the fraud, as well as clear and release transactions that were blocked inadvertently and are not fraudulent. And the latter point is one that I think it needs to be considered and not overlooked, because whether you're offering a digital banking platform to your clients or your role is in a corporate and you're in accounts payable and you service the organization's vendors, you can't forget about the client experience. And releasing transactions that were deemed high risk and actually aren't is just as important as stopping those that are. No one wants to be responsible for holding a payroll back for an organization that was suspected to be fraudulent only to find out that it wasn't. Next slide, please. So, in addition, organizations need to look both inside and outside for potential threats. Now, insiders pose just as much, and if not more, threat to an organization because they know not only the systems but the process. And oftentimes, it's the people you least expect. Most insiders, I don't believe, look for employment to commit fraud. It's a life-changing event a lot of times for these people. They've come under hard times, developed a drug or alcohol problem, et cetera, and they felt that they had few options. A good example of that was noted recently in the New York Times, monitoring bank tellers who pose a challenge for many of the banks. And we have a case study on the next slide for that, please. So let's take this global bank, for example. The challenge they identified was that their bank tellers serve as the single most frequent interface between customers and branch transactions, which I think is true for all banks. Tellers are authorized to access system networks, applications, and vast amounts of sensitive customer data. Because many banks struggle to track what these tellers are actually doing, though, they struggle to detect and stop fraudulent insider activity in real time. And one thing I would point out is it's not necessarily the capabilities of the application that can commit fraud, it's the actual theft of the data itself. So tellers, for example, can look up bank account information and write that down and leave the organization and then do something else with it. So just being able to view sensitive data needs to be considered when you're looking at technology to deploy. So in this response, this bank deployed a bottom line solution, and they put it in place to monitor their back office teller applications. The implementation was brought up in a couple of days, and it removed the dependency on their application log files. Once it was deployed, they saw a sizable decrease in policy violations, and they were able to actually prevent a collusion scheme that they detected, which had been targeting dormant accounts in excess of $400,000. The investigation also, their investigation times were decreased by 90%, which they said went from days to hours. And they're now able to investigate potential fraud incidents in real time, saving the organization money and protecting their reputational risk. The other thing I would point out with this application is there is a lot of value in just the fact that it was known to the users that were being monitored. The example I would give is that ADT sign or that security sign in front of your house. If somebody is scoping out a neighborhood and determining which houses they're going to break into, surely they're going to avoid the ones that have a security system in front of them. So letting your users know that they're being watched is not necessarily a bad thing. Next slide, please. This second case study is actually a corporate organization. And after initial proof of concept with a different solution, they found that that solution didn't deliver the results they were looking for. They reached out to Bottom Line. The feedback we got when they originally spoke to us is their attraction to the application is that they found it to be a comprehensive solution, and they felt it provided significant ROI within months of the acquisition of the software. There were no lengthy delays in implementation, and of course, every organization has a stressed IT team, and they required little IT resource on their side to implement. They found it to be very user-friendly, and that it took only days to install. But what I find was particularly interesting about this customer and why I like this case study, because as they started using it, they found some additional benefits that they got out of the application. They were able to get the real-time intelligence that enabled them to scale up and down their fraud management operations according to the level of threat they faced. I have here a quote from one of their senior executives that I'd like to read because it actually articulates very well what the benefits they received. They said, "It also helps us identify and investigate suspicious activities without devoting disproportionate amounts of resource and time. For example, we recently saw some activity that merited further investigation. We tracked some transactions and discovered nothing improper was occurring, but an operator was using some backdoor techniques to speed up various processes. We have addressed the situation now and done so very quickly. Our policies are much stronger as a result." So as a result of this, putting the system in place, they were able to take a look at and find some things that people were doing that wasn't necessarily fraudulent but strengthened their organization as a whole. That led to them having a brainstorming strategy as to how else they could use the technology, and they're looking now to be able to deploy it to monitor the day-to-day performance of their customer services teams and pick up inconsistencies in the way in which they deal with their clients. The last case study is what we call a web payment fraud case study, which is a large U.S. bank. And in this case, the bank wanted to help protect their clients and subsequently protect themselves, which is, I think, a theme that we heard from both of the bank presenters today. According to a recent AFP report, 62% of organizations were targets of payment fraud in 2014. And for the banks, the incidence of wire fraud virtually doubled in that same report from 14 to 27%. And as more and more customers wean themselves off their reliance on paper checks, fraudsters have focused their attacks on hijacking identities to redirect transfers to their accounts. And then that's only going to increase. To combat this problem, this particular bank deployed a solution to help identify when clients had malware on their systems. So their requirement was, we want to help our clients detect when they have malware, but we can't put any software on their desktop. So what happens is when the customers log into their e-banking portal, the bottom line solution analyzes the traffic that is coming into the bank and applies it against malware signatures to determine when we suspect there's something wrong with the customer's machine. And this bank will then reach out to the customer and tell them that they think they've detected some malware. They found many instances where this had been the case, and they were able to call these clients and help them and provide a better customer experience above and beyond what many of their competitors can currently do. Next slide, please. So what's Bottom Line's role in all of this? Well, we've been providing banks and corporations cash management and digital banking platforms for more than 25 years. So in response to the growing concerns, we bought a leading cybersecurity platform more than a year ago. We understand that the systems that provide payment technology today need to provide value above and beyond just the ability to move money. And so as an example, if you're in a bank and you're not effectively catering to the SMB market, you'll end up competing on price rather than the value that your services can deliver. And if your organization can't match the investments your competitors are making, then your customers will start to seek new providers. So what we did was, when we looked for this organization, immediately after acquisition, we integrated these capabilities into the solution we offer our clients, as well as our own business. And this is for the corporations on the phone. Because within 2 weeks of completing the acquisition, we were monitoring our own financial applications, and we put in place rules that allow us to look for phishing scams. Now, that doesn't track email, but what it does is it actually looks for account changes within our ERP applications, generates reports, and looks for suspicious transactions that might be generated immediately after account changes, and we notify people when that occurs so that we can look into it. So we'll continue to build out these capabilities, whether we integrate it into the solutions that we offer, or we're helping customers by monitoring their own mission-critical applications that are within their business, such as their ERPs. So one thought to leave on, and I think the theme that has resonated throughout the presentation, is that banks and corporates should and have been and need to continue to work together. I've heard it stated before that fraud prevention is not a competitive advantage. Well, I slightly disagree with that statement, because I do think that organizations with stronger risk practices are better to position are better positioned to attract and retain clients. I'm a consumer of banking services as well, and would definitely consider the cybersecurity practices of a bank before I was going to give them my business. But I think the benefit to collaboration far outweighs the advantages gained by not working together. At Bottom Line, we do business with 1,400 financial institutions, and we provide cash management services for thousands of corporations. We're uniquely positioned to be able to view the activity across our clients and identify suspicious activities that may otherwise not look suspect when only seen through a single lens. I'll provide an example of that. So when fraudsters attempt to open accounts online, they generally do so across multiple banks concurrently or over a very short period of time. So an organization that could establish an anti-fraud network that can view new account requests across banks could identify when multiple requests are being initiated by the same account holder, and possibly alert a second or third or fourth bank that we're seeing similar requests across multiple banks. So at Bottom Line, we're constantly working to take this information and provide the benefits across all of our clients. And I think that this mentality needs to continue across banks, corporations, and technology providers, so that we can make sure that that the good guys can always stay ahead of the bad guys. So with that, we wanted to close out with a last polling question and determine, what is your top forward-looking priority to improve fraud prevention in your organization? Would it be education, policies and controls, or fraud detection systems and integration? Pick one response, please.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And once you've answered the polling question, if there's any Q&A you'd like the panelists to address, you can go ahead and enter that as well in the Q&A panel, or by clicking on the question mark icon. And I suppose it's not fair to ask people to just pick one when all of our panelists have pretty much reiterated that it is a multi-pronged approach that works best, but I guess we're looking for more which of these are the most critical areas of emphasis. Okay. All right, we have our answer, and it's evenly split for the most part, although the number one answer is fraud detection systems and integration, followed by education, and then lastly, policies and controls. So a variety of answers across each of the areas. So at this point, we do want to open it up for Q&A, and we have some interesting questions to address here. So one was regarding the bottom line malware detection for bank customers. How do the banks approach customers so that the customers are not leery of the contact from the bank as a phishing scam? And perhaps we can open that up to our bank panelists.
Well, this is Margaret. I think that is hard. You know, as we see information about it, like using Trusteer, there are flags that the bank receives, but it is hard when you call the company and explain it. And we generally start with the corporate administrator and let the corporate administrator communicate with the direct user. But there's usually a lot of question marks and concern, and fortunately we use people, our client services team that is normally in direct communication with the corporate administrator, so that helps with the the comfort factor, okay, this is a trusted person I know, and they've helped me before, and they're telling me something that is useful for me to act upon.
Excellent, thank you. We also have a question more from a corporate perspective, and the question is, what would you say is the top operational practice you put in place to combat fraud? Craig, do you want to take a swing at that one?
Sure, I'll talk about payment processing. The key there is clearly segregation of duties within the company, making sure that you have the people that cannot conflict approving the payment at every step along the way, whether it's a PO item that ends up being a payment or any other vendor payment. Really just making sure that you have the proper controls all the way through the process and that approvals are required within the system and not outside of the system to make sure that you have an audit trail to make sure that at the end of the day, at the end of the cycle, when the payment is made, whether it's a check being cut or a wire being paid or an ACH being paid, that it's been authorized at every step along the chain.
Excellent, thank you. And Shelley and Margaret, I think both of you mentioned the use of Trusteer. There's a couple questions here that we're seeing. One is just to confirm that you have mandated it for all of your online channel users, and then the other question is, did you get a lot of pushback, and how did you address that pushback in getting clients to adopt the solution?
Well, this is Shelley Travis from BBT, and yes, Trusteer report is mandated for all of our users. When we rolled this out several years ago, we did it in waves, and we did it with a lot of client communication to help educate our clients on the benefits of the report service, because really it not only can detect the malware, but it will clean it from the user's machine. And so we really, the rollout, quite honestly, for BB&T went very, very well. We did allow a grace period for our clients to access the software and work into it. It is a full admin version, so some of these did require some IT support, and we worked with those clients along the way to help make sure that they were able to get the software loaded and using it. So it went very well for us. Yes,
and this is Margaret. We also mandated, and it went very well for us. I'll say in the whole process, we lost only one customer because of it, and it was because that customer used Linux computers. And at that time, Trustee Rapport was not compatible with that type computer, but everyone else incorporated it. You know, sometimes there's some grumbling, but once they understand why, they download it and they go on and they don't question it going forward.
Great, thank you. And I know we're not going to be able to get through all the questions, but I'll hit a couple of the ones that are more strategic, and we may follow up independently on some of the more technical questions. One of the questions that's very interesting here, and I'll open this up for any of the panelists to jump in, is what do you think will be the next area the fraudsters will attack? So what vulnerability will they attack with regards to payment processing, or what method of attack? And what should corporates be monitoring for next as they think about, you know, this constant cat and mouse game? Where's the next frontier that they should be most concerned about?
Well, that's a good one. I'll go back to, well, I think the one that's prevalent now we talked about was phishing, for example, and I find that kind of interesting because the 1990s or early 2000 movies showing hackers as, you know, teenagers with computers breaking into the FBI, that's just not how things are done, right? They're not even hackers these days, they're imposters. They'll send an email within your organization to try to get you to change an account information. You don't need significant computer skills to be able to do something like that. So, you know, I'm not sure what the next generation is. I think that but it is interesting to see how things have morphed from people trying to break into your networks to really just get smart people wanting to do the right things to do the wrong things by accident. So I don't know what's coming next. I do think that if I knew, I'd already be kind of offering a solution to try to compete against it. But I think that maybe to flip that question around would be what can technology providers be doing more to maybe stay ahead of the game, which would be adding things like biometric capabilities into e-banking portals. There's a lot of talk these days around machine learning, the concept of these monitoring applications kind of going and looking at profiles of people to be able to anticipate where fraud might actually occur. And there's a very fuzzy line there between, you know, going too far and stepping over ethical boundaries. But so from a technology perspective, I think what the providers will do is start to add other methods of authentication that are kind of easier. And your fingerprints could be with your phones, having it look at and identify you as a person through the camera on your screen. So I think that the technology will change to try to stay ahead of the fraudsters. Unfortunately, I don't know what schemes or what they'll try to come up with next. But I think if we do some of these things, it might actually thwart them before they actually become mainstream.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike. And I think it's an interesting point. When the technology gets strong, the next line of attack is to try to compromise the people, even though technology can obviously be used to prevent and limit fraud executed by people. One question we have is a very intriguing question, and banks are always looking to deepen the nature of their security solutions. And Mike, I was intrigued that you mentioned that Bottom Line is even doing things to sort of validate data and vendor master records and things like that at the ERP level. I guess I'd open this up for the panelists, and even from the perspective of Craig, whether he would be, this would be something you'd be interested in, but do we see banks offering deeper fraud services to their client base, and do we see them charging and getting paid fees from their corporate clients for increased levels of fraud monitoring?
I'll let the banks answer as to whether or not they have the appetite for it. I'll give my perspective, because I have been asked a couple of times, not and what my thought is on it, but my thought in general is a lot of times it's a little bit like insurance, right? And I was talking to a junior member of my team a couple of weeks ago, and he said, well, I spend $800 a year on insurance. I don't have much of an ROI on it, and I've never been in an accident. I said, yeah, but if you get sued, if you do tomorrow and you get sued for $500,000, that's a heck of an ROI. My general opinion is, and I'm not an actuary by any means, But I do think there is an opportunity to ask the corporates to pay a reasonable fee for additional fraud protections as long as they're going to get something out of it. And the one question I've asked banks in the past would be whether or not they would do something like that if they would cover losses up to a certain amount. And again, I'm not an actuary, but it is just something that I think that people may want to look at in the future.
Interesting. Margaret or Shelley, do you want to wade into that, or do you want to decline to answer? Don't want to put you on the spot.
I think as long as it was a truly value-added service that we could provide, and it was something that really provided a guarantee or some degree of guarantee of protection, then it's something that could be sold. But again, it's BBVA's belief that it's our responsibility to protect our customers and their transactions. So I think it would, if we had this next great tool, the next great thing that could protect, I think we would use it and protect our customers and let that help our reputation and help our competitiveness. But I don't know that it's something we would sell.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is Shelley Travis from BB&T. I would agree with Margaret's statements. We feel very strongly that we have an obligation to protect our clients' assets. If there were a tool that provided additional security measures for activities that were on the client side that they would normally be responsible for instance, right, within their own environment, that we could help facilitate some validation or some additional security measures, something where we're going sort of above and beyond, there might be a market for that. But as Margaret said, really when it comes to our systems and the controls and how we're managing that, we do feel we have that obligation to help provide those measures to our clients.
Okay, thank you. I know we didn't cover card payments, and this may be the last question we can take, but we have a question as to whether or not the EMV introduction is going to reduce payment fraud for retailers or generally for point-of-sale transactions. And I'm not sure if any of you are working in that area, but I'll open that up to see if any of the panelists would like to address that, and I can give my 2 cents on that if no one wants to jump in.
Well, that's right. And again, my focus is the e-banking channels, not overall fraud, but I have a very strong partner in the fraud group, and she told me that in Europe, when they rolled out the EMV and the cards, that what that did was change the fraudsters' focus from cards back to electronic payments. So whether or not EMV itself will provide more protection, I think it will be, hey, it's the new security thing, so it will redirect attention back to other payments for the fraudsters.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think what everyone is concerned about is it's going to push it from point of sale to the online markets, and that's going to take obviously much more complex algorithms and authentication to prevent that from rising. And I think one of the concerns is because the U.S. is somewhat last among the developed countries to adopt EMV, that some of the fraudsters that have begun attacking EMV payment activities may see the U.S. as fertile ground because we just don't have as much experience processing these activities. Great. Well, we've run out of time, and we haven't even begun to address all the questions that were given to us. So we will try to follow up with each individual personally on the questions. I want to thank everyone for attending, and just as a reminder, we will be sending you a link that will give you a copy of the presentation and a link to an online recording that will be posted to Treasury Strategies' very successful YouTube channel. Thank you for joining, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.